Words on the left, the words, come from another National Academy of Sciences report on facilitating interdisciplinary learning. And it's the best book from the National Academies. I read most of the reports that come out. Some of them are very boring and very dry and not relevant at all. This one is. If I were an architect or an academic, this would be a book on my shelf, so I can argue with faculty who say, I want a chemistry lab and a blank lab and a blank lab, to say, but you know, here's this report from the National Academies that talk about interdisciplinary learning. But they also have in that book two interesting points for this conversation. One is what makes a successful interdisciplinary leadership team. And there's more than that, I just kind of collapsed it. The other is that they interviewed Research One universities, faculty and administrators, on the barriers to facilitating interdisciplinary research, which was the title of the report. Provosts had facilities at 80% of the barrier. The barrier from the perspective of provosts to doing something that everybody says is important, which is facilitating interdisciplinary, collaborative, cross-cultural conversations. So think about that. So I went back into my PCAL book, and I got a quote from PCAL archive. And this is from Bruce Alberts when he was at the National Academy of Sciences, and how he thought institutional change really happened. And this is, I'm just going to read this quickly. If our universities and colleges are to adapt to the rapidly evolving world, they need bold and progressive leadership to fit the forces that traditionally resist change. My, he says, personal insights is that irrational inertia can be overcome with creative efforts. The importance of gifted individuals, small groups, and I think, Art, I learned this from you, gather a few people who really care. Large committees accomplish less because of this conservative nature of academic committees. Now, how much would resonate with that? Bruce also said, provide people enough rope and flexibility to make changes. And one of the things we've really learned in Project Kaleidoscope over the past several years is the importance of sandboxing and piloting changes. And some of the answers to the questions that you all were talking about, how do we know these are going to work in that institutional context? And then Bruce says, and he says, this is his last and I think most important point, that naive young intellectuals are critical in pushing the system into the future. Don't have all the people who look like me on the planning committee. I think that would be the clue there. You have to have people who are going to be using and living and dreaming and imagining and reshaping those spaces for the next 20 or 30 years. I would be a lovely member of a planning committee. If I could dye my hair, perhaps they would want me to have one in. So I put the chart book. You know, I've just got a new hip, and I'm kind of nervous. Can't jump rope yet. This is from a book from the engineering community. It's a textbook from engineers on how to build high-performing teams. It's a great book. I do have a bibliography at the end of my PowerPoint, so it'll go up on whatever we do here. So, but if I were putting a planning team together, either from the architect's perspective or the academic perspective, I'd look at this book from Carl Smith, who happens to be a professor at the University of Minnesota. He quotes from Boeing in there on how to make high-performing teams. There's tons of more books coming out now, and it really struck me as I assembled the stack of books that I thought reports were relevant to this talk. Howard Hughes has put out a book on entering mentoring, what makes an effective research lab, and how people work together in teams, and how leaders take responsibility for making a difference. So all these themes are out there. And if you're working in an academic setting, within or beyond the STEM fields, there are resources out there from their community that you can translate into tools for shaping a good planning team. I could go into all sorts of others, but I'm watching my time here, so you can talk again. So make the action auditable. Audit actionable. I did that wrong, didn't I? Make the audit actionable. When you sit down to figure out your questions, and you find the answers to the questions, translate those into actions that you're doing. Now this is one of my favorite quotes on institutional change from Ronald Heifetz, who's at the Kennedy Center in Boston. And it's just a good image for me to think about, and this is if you're an educator here, you know, about the cold learning cycle, that you do something, you think about it, you do it, you think about it. So it's just that kind of iterative. But So here what he's saying is you really need to find out what the patterns are happening, what the change patterns are happening in an ongoing way. So change happens, you do a pilot, you see what happens, you reflect on it, and then you come back and look at it. So these are all Jeanne Narum's thoughts about how to make the planning process work to serve learning. So you keep going back, you're looking for patterns on learning, and you keep going back and saying, how are the patterns shaping on our campus? Become engaged as a learner. The long quote on the